You can call the picture on the background of this presentation truly iconic. It's a picture that I hope defining moment of the history in the making. This picture was taken from the Global Times inauguration of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. This photo op, this visit of the Russian president comes in the wake of escalation of tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been drawn into this conflict. Russia has massive deployment of troops along the mobilized more than 1 lakh troops along the Ukraine border. The man and machine are all there. Amid this escalating tension, NATO is also reinforcing its security presence in the Russian neighborhood. So, amid this escalation of tension, Vladimir Putin is reaching out to another communist country, that is China. So, this picture holds a significance in global politics. The importance of this picture will not be lost in coming days. That this will be a defining picture, I think, of Russia and Sino-Russian alliance against this increasing footprint, the military footprint of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization under the US leadership in the Russian neighborhood and beyond. This holds significance not only for Russia and China, but all the countries in Asia. So, without further ado about this, let me just start the presentation titled Ukraine Crisis and Desire for Just Peace. War does not determine who is right, only who is left. This nugget of wisdom rings so true even today. Then why not talk about this war, this conflict situation, instead of racking our brains on whether Winston Churchill, Bertrand Russell, some other naughty politician or polymath uttered these timeless words. Today, a handful of countries are armed to their teeth with nuclear weapons. This arming has created an unjust world in which the countries with nuclear capabilities call almost all the shots in global peace and security. Nuclear disarmament remains largely on paper, with powerful countries getting rid of ages-old nuclear warheads in the name of disarmament and developing new and more powerful ones. Let me share with you a report titled "Status of Nuclear Forces." Uh, this is the report from the Federation of American Scientists. It states, despite progress in reducing nuclear weapons arsenals since the Cold War, the world's combined inventory of nuclear warheads remains at a very high level. Nine countries possessed roughly 13,150 warheads as of mid 2021. Let me share with you a glimpse of that important report published in the Federation of American Scientists. It shows that the United States has 5,600 nuclear warheads as of mid 2021, whereas Russia has a little more than that. It has 6,200 57 nuclear warheads. What does the nine countries having nuclear warheads means for the larger world? This means that these select countries have an unfair advantage over other countries. These countries can easily blackmail non-nuke countries by flexing their nuclear muscles. It's not a just global order by any means. If that Federation of American Scientists report is anything to go by, Russia and the United States own 91% of all nuclear warheads. There are 11 other countries. They have a few hundred nuclear weapons at their disposal. What does this mean? This means that this national security and international security is in the grips of select countries, the largest arsenals of nuclear weapons. The report published in the Federation of American Scientists website, that is fas.org, further adds globally the overall inventory of nuclear weapons is declining. But there's a catch. But the pace of reduction is slowing compared with the past 30 years. Moreover, all of that reduction is happening only because the United States and Russia are still dismantling previously retired warheads. In terms of military stockpile, the overall number, the military stockpiles is increasing again. The United States is probably still reducing its nuclear stockpile, but it appears to be leveling out. Whereas France and Israel have relatively stable inventories of nuclear weapons, but China, India, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, and the United Kingdom are all thought to be increasing their nuclear stockpiles. During the Cold War era, the US led NATO and the then USSR led Warsaw military alliances used to compete for global influence, for global supremacy. Thus, they divided the world by and large into two camps, that is, the NATO camp and the Warsaw camp, and they muffled the voices of countries that chose to stay neutral. This race for supremacy slowed down a bit with the disintegration of the USSR and the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact in the 1990s. The 1990s were marked by historic events like the pulling down of the Britain Wall, the Berlin Wall, I mean. That was not alone. It was also marked by the USSR pullout from the next door neighbor, Afghanistan, after huge losses in terms of lives and fortunes. With the Warsaw Pact consigned to the annals of history, the ever-growing footprints of NATO would be here, there, everywhere, including in the neighborhood of Russia. Let me just share with you this uh, slide, this infographics about the NATO, the increasing NATO presence in the Russian neighborhood, in the extended neighborhood of Russia. To get a fresh perspective about the matter, this is the This is the slide showing the expansion of the NATO since 1997. It shows that uh, the NATO has its footprints, security, military footprints in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria. This is a BBC infographics. Those marked blue joined NATO before 1997, whereas those marked green joined NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, since after 1997. Expansion of the NATO, some political pundits, experts argue uh, that this expansion is against the US promise to the disintegrating USSR to not move an inch eastward, that during that pact, uh, the United States had, the NATO had agreed uh, that it will not move into the neighborhood of Russia. But that commitment is now subject to various interpretations. Despite this ever expanding presence of NATO in the region, Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 in the wake of protests against the Russia friendly regime. That was not just one case of a Russian invasion. Russia invaded uh, parts of Georgia in 2008 as well. Anyways, the party time for NATO seemed to have come to a halt, if not a stop altogether, with the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. This American pullout from Afghanistan marked the end of a 2-decade-long military campaign initiated after the September 9/11 attacks on the US homeland. I leave it to military historians to assess the losses resulting from that misadventure, which was part of the global war on terror. Now, call it the irony of ironies. China and Russia are now back in the graveyard of civilizations, that is, Afghanistan. This move is perhaps part of their bid to reclaim the lost ground. But their celebration over the hasty US withdrawal from Afghanistan shall be over, at least for now. Why? Because the NATO is seeking to enter battleground Ukraine with the apparent intention of bringing former USSR constituents into its fold. By just this effort, the NATO seems to be undermining the presence of Russia in that neighborhood. Uh, by this move, the NATO seems to be challenging indirectly, albeit indirectly, Russia in its sphere of influence and jeopardizing its security. At present, a fraught NATO. What I mean by fraud is that not all European members want outright animosity with Russia, and that includes Germany and maybe France also. This is because these European countries, in fact, the whole of Europe, is dependent on oil and natural gas from Russia. And this fraud NATO is trying hard to rein in on Russia, which is stepping up security along the Ukraine border with massive buildup of uh, military capabilities, men and machine in that area, even as Western media reports continue to point that Russia will attack Ukraine in February itself. That's a dreadful scenario indeed, but various media channels are just hyping up that escalating tension. In an article titled "A Former Supreme Commander of NATO on What Putin's Up to in the Ukraine," this article was published in Time.com on January 10, 2021. Admiral James Stavridis, retired. He is a retired admiral. He is also a Time contributing editor and the 16th Supreme Allied Commander at NATO. Admiral Stavridis outlines the following objectives behind Russian President Vladimir Putin's objectives uh, behind troops build-up along the Ukraine border. He, meaning Putin, uh, Stavridis says, wants to appear strong and decisive to his domestic base. He wants to divide the US and NATO over the response to a potential strike. Obviously, Putin wants to impress his allies, especially President Xi Jinping of China. That uh, that photo up should be read in this context. That is my just observation. It wants to prevent, I mean, Putin wants to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO and the European Union, and wants to tie them to Russia's sphere of influence. And Putin also wants to make the Biden administration appear weak and indecisive in the run up to the 2021 midterms. This especially after the US failed to support the former ally Afghanistan. It is quite clear that China has higher stakes in Russia and her neighborhood amid global oil and gas shortages. These shortages have been exacerbated by pandemic-induced lockdowns, Houthi attacks in the United Arab Emirates, American sanctions against Iran, and the latter's strained relations with Saudi Arabia. What should not be forgotten is the fact that Europe needs NATO for security, but it also needs oil and gas from Russia to fight these dreary winters, and also fuel economic growth. There's a vast world beyond Russia, Ukraine, and NATO. This vast world also needs peace and security for a holistic growth. Looming wars like this one bring existential crisis, the existential challenges of small and weak nations to the fore. These warlike situations and wars make one wonder if the world order is supposed to cater to mighty nations alone, despite the presence of high sounding international organizations like the United Nations. It should not also be forgotten that so called Great nations do not forget their humiliations, their defeats, and this includes Russia under Putin, which wants to retain its clout over former USSR constituents in the backdrop of ever expanding NATO presence in the region. These, these great nations learn lessons from such incidents and try to avoid the pitfalls. Let me just uh, share again this uh, infographics about the increasing NATO foothold in the region. This is what it looks like. I'll share with you later on also in my YouTube presentation. Almost 2 centuries after the war with Great Britain that forced let me also talk a bit about our predicaments, our wars that have just kind of just further led to Nepal losing large chunks of her territories. Almost 2 centuries after the war with Great Britain that forced Nepal to cede large chunks of territories, we seem to be in a deep slumber, even as our existential crisis deepen with each passing day. Since the 1950s, major political changes have taken place every decade or so. But these changes have failed to bring desired changes in the lives of commoners. As our neighbors continue to rise and shine, we continue to go down the slippery slope. So precarious is our position that we lose when our giant neighbors war. We again lose when they make peace. Hardly any days, hardly any day goes by without the Nepalese reading, hearing about or seeing with their own eyes the capture of their territories. This unwarranted aggression makes independent minds wonder if a sustained war against Nepal is still on, even as state organs continue to maintain this studied silence or outright helplessness when it comes to dealing with instances of such aggression. Against this backdrop, uh, people like me want nothing but peace in Ukraine, Nepal, and beyond. All we want is a just peace all over the world and nothing else. With this closing remark, I wrap up this edition of Soft Talk. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.